Yes.
Is that him? Seriously? To talk about.
7 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Ed Byers. This is John Colburn. We're going to be talking about policing and the Constitution tonight. If you have any questions, that's what's going to drive this debate. Are the questions from you guys about policing and the Constitution. You ask a question, we each have 3 minutes to answer, or no more than 3 minutes to answer. And then we will take as many questions as possible. We'll go till 8 o'clock or until you guys run out of questions, one of the two. Make sure everybody's filming's ready. You ready? Chris, are you ready?
Just a second, Ed.
Chris Reeder will be our timekeeper tonight. He'll be keeping time for us as to when the 3 minutes are over.
And I'm also trying to live stream it for him, so bear with me 1 second. No, you're fine.
And the questions can be related to anything that's going on currently, such as the Clark County Jail or anything nationally, as far as use of force issues, whatever. Doesn't matter. Good to go? Okay, we're good. Since I initiated the debate, I'm going to let my opponent go first. Who has the first question? Yes, sir.
Mr. Colburn, you're up here to the debate. What is your association with politics? Why are you doing this?
Well, I have absolutely no association with politics. I'm not a candidate for sheriff. I'm not a candidate for any elective office in November 22. What happened is I seen a post by Mr. Byers where he was taking issue with the Republican Party for changing words in its platform from democracy to republic. And in my opinion, that position by him is a disqualifying position for sheriff, as the sheriff is the only constitutional elected office for law enforcement. We should know that we live in a republic. And as we should know is that a democracy, by its definition, is majority rule, which put a different way is mob rule. And we are not a democracy. We are, by every measure, a republic. And that's, he took issue with my position as I took issue with his. And so here we are on a beautiful Friday night in Charlestown, Indiana.
Let me debate. Mr. Colburn was a candidate in the primary. He was a candidate for District 70 for the State House. He did not make the ballot. So just to make that confusion there, Don. There are at least 2 constitutional or elected officials that are law enforcement officials in the state, county, Clark County, in the state. But in the counties, it's the county attorney and it's the sheriff. So there's 2 of them. And he's right. I disagree with changing it to a republic. We are a democratic republic. We're not a republic by any stretch of the imagination. We are a democratic republic in the state of
We have a constitutional republic, which means we utilize democratic principles, but by every definition, it is a republic because we have no direct votes on any laws. We are a rule-by-law nation, or we used to be, and that is the definition of a republic. The definition of a democracy is majority rule. And we've had situations in the past where the majority ruled. The Salem witch trials, the lynch mobs at the South, the riots in the summer of 2020, even the riot in our capital in 2021. Very clear examples of democracy and mob rule. That's why we have laws. We have 3 branches of government that are representative of the people. We are by no stretch of the imagination a democracy.
And I disagree. We are a democratic republic. As evidence when the French stormed the Bastille and beheaded Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. That was mob rule under a republic. That the fact that it was mob rule in the January 6th rebellion doesn't reflect upon democracy, it reflects upon people with a lack of knowledge of how the peaceful transfer of power happens under the Constitution of the United States. Next question?
Got one.
Go ahead.
We'll let each of you answer individually. Whoever wants to answer first can, but I'd like for both of you to answer this one. What is constitutional policing to you? What does it mean to you?
Well, constitutional, and I am not a law enforcement officer. I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express once. But to me, constitutional policing means that you follow the rule of law. When you have riots that are being perpetrated, whether it's in downtown Louisville or in the Capitol, the police are supposed to step up, stop that because it's against the law. I don't think 21st century, defund the police, bail reform, citizen or criminal rights being elevated above victim rights. I don't think that's the 21st century policing that we want here. That's what they have in Louisville.
And I agree with part of Colburn's statements there. I believe that bail reform has to be very judiciously handled, and those instances where bail reform doesn't work fall back on the judiciary and the criminal justice system. Policing has nothing to do with that. I also have been a federal law enforcement officer for 31 years, and I also have a PhD in criminal justice from the University of Louisville. Constitutional law is where, and as a federal agent, I'm very much aware of this, is the ultimate guideline by which you enforce the law. It is where, and states a lot of times have laws that are unconstitutional, and the government comes in, the federal government comes in under the supreme sovereign doctrine and fixes it by making a law. We do have a constitutional obligation as law enforcement officers to obey that law, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we've had instances like slavery, we've had instances where women were not allowed to vote, and we've had instances where even some indigenous people were not even considered humans at the time. All that has changed via the Constitution. The Constitution is a very, very old and very important thing. It's been around for a long time. It has had 26 amendments. 9 of those deal with due process and policing. Yes, ma'am.
Do you consider the Constitution a living document?
Can I go first? You want me?
Oh, I can. Absolutely not. The Constitution should be interpreted as it was written, and if there are questions, we have the Federalist Papers that we can reference. James Madison in Federalist 10 talked about how we are a republic and how pure democracies always degrade into tyranny. And so I believe that our Constitution is not a living document.
I believe it is a living document. There's been 26 amendments over the years that make it a living document. It's where the founders or our elected officials have determined that there has been something wrong with it and it needs to be fixed. Part of that is the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Without that, 15 of you people here would not have the right to vote. So I think it is a living document. It has to be interpreted as to the time, and it also has to be amended by both houses of Congress and signed by the President. Has done so 26 times.
I would just kind of like to add to that a little bit. The Constitution in itself does provide the mechanism by which it can be changed and modified, but that has nothing to do with it being a living document. That has nothing to do with its interpretation. When we amend the Constitution, it's because of the very first sentence in it to form a more perfect union. We find errors that the Constitution knew we would find as society matured and moved forward. it is applicable to all times. It is applicable to all technologies. And if we find a way to make our union more perfect, we have the mechanism in the amendments to do that.
And I stand by that those amendments make it a living document. It's not frozen in time. Yes, sir.
What is your definition of a living document?
A living document is a document that can be changed if it's deemed for the better for the majority of people or the people that it affects.
I think her question was more of what some past administrations wanted to do with the Constitution without actually following the rules and changing it.
And
In other words, make it liquid.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court usually comes in and fixes that. Through the holding it that the laws aren't constitutional.
I would just, you're right. I mean, we need the Supreme Court. It needs to be the way it is. I think, the political climate of the day, discussing expanding the court because they don't like certain decisions. I think those are dangerous tactics. Those are extremely dangerous thought processes, and we need to respect the decisions of the Supreme Court just as we respect the laws passed by Congress and signed by the President.
I agree with that. Yes, sir.
So with the whole abortion issue, going over the Constitution being like a living document, it's in terms of it being a document that is dead, as in essentially like you need to interpret it the way it was interpreted. You also have to like interpret it based on the values of the founders and that sort of thing. I believe like the right to abortion was based on some sort of, it was in the penumbras and the emanations, and they were talking, they like drew it from like some sort of right to privacy, something like that. But that's an example of them treating it as a living document and interpreting it the way that of the times, not their times, because if they interpreted it in their times, they would have interpreted the Constitution as like, life is life, and they would have recognized the way the founders viewed life, which is, from a Christian standpoint. And so that's my understanding of like interpreting the Constitution. You have to, it can be amended, of course. It's not the Bible, the Constitution is not gospel, but it needs to be understood and interpreted from the founders' perspective, not from the current perspective. Like, if we were to, I don't know, like their definition of men is like mankind or something like that, we can't like misinterpret that and then claim that they were only speaking about like males, that sort of thing. It's just calling it a living document is, to me, it means interpreting the words and the phrases that they used and how we use it today, not that it can't not be amended. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I know what your question is, sir.
I was just trying to make a point.
Okay, excellent.
When you look at the Constitution, when you read the Constitution, do you read it as it was, or do you try to imply today's your thought, the thought processes of today to their wording, to switch it to what you would want it mean it today instead of what it was supposed to be back then? That is what he's going for. That's what he's asking.
That would be a question. That would be the question.
Yeah, whenever I read the Constitution, I read it as to the context of, as a federal agent, what situation am I in and how can I best not violate the Constitution.
So you're reading it, you're taking today's and you're interpreting today instead of for the meaning of it instead of the original intent of the document.
Yeah, because there were no machine guns back in 1776.
Yeah, it doesn't
there
matter.
There were no hand grenades. There were no.
There were military-grade weapons. We could have our own
military-grade
cannons.
weapons.
Okay, we could have our own cannons. That's just the way that it
Muskets and that
was.
sort of stuff were the big issue. As a federal agent, I had to look at that, and I'm looking at a box of squad assault rifles that we've
First off, assault
done a case on, and I have to look at that and go, okay, how does the Constitution affect me here? How do I best handle this? And usually it's due process.
So how would you interpret the Second Amendment when it comes to military-grade weapons?
I think that fully automatic weapons are not allowed under the Gun Control Act of 1968.
Is that constitutional?
They're not, as abortion, military-grade weapons and abortion are not mentioned in the Constitution.
They are under arms.
No, they're not. Military-grade weapons are not under the
Arms
Constitution.
protected by the Second Amendment were military-grade. They were
A well-armed militia and the right of the people to bear arms. They had no idea that military weapons would be such prevalent as they are today. Do I think military weapons should be banned? Is that what you're asking me? I think that if they're fully automatic, they probably should be. Semi-automatic, I do not.
Mr. Byers, I got a question. So, okay, sorry.
So the point of the Second Amendment is to arm the citizens as equal to the government. Would you agree?
It doesn't say that, no. I wouldn't agree with that.
It says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That seems pretty clear. The point being that the founders knew that if a government was stronger and more armed than its people, then it could subdue them, right?
I don't argue with you there.
And so therefore, like, the Second Amendment allowed for cannons for like merchant ships. It allowed for muskets, which were military-grade weapons at the time.
They were cutting edge at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, in effect, the whole gun should be banned. It's not protected under the Second Amendment. It doesn't make any sense because the purpose is that the Second Amendment allows citizens to have military-grade weapons. I mean, to say that they thought that, or they saw muskets as like, you know, ineffective and...
Do you have an M4?
I do, yeah.
I have two. They're military-grade weapons. Is yours fully automatic?
No.
Mine is not either, and I support you for having that weapon. And if it was fully automatic, would I support you? No, because it's against the Gun Control Act of 1968.
But I believe that act is unconstitutional.
Then get a hold of your U.S. representative and senator and have them fix it.
We need a new senator.
May I follow up?
Yes.
What would be your reason for not wanting a fully automatic weapon to be in the hands of civilians?
Because I've seen too many people use them in bad circumstances, kill too many people.
It's not the gun's fault.
It's not the gun's fault. But
Have you
it's
seen
the
the
ability of the
government
person to
use
get to the
fully
gun
automatic
that's the fault.
against the people?
Huh?
Have you seen the government misuse fully automatic weapons against the people?
I saw Waco. Saw that happen. Lost a friend there. I think it was handled poorly. There are better ways that they could have handled that, knowing that Koresh came out of that compound twice a week to get the mail. Could have got him at the post office and did what they needed to do.
So what does shall not be infringed mean to you?
That you could
Guys,
keep
there's
their
another
arms,
question
as long
over
as they
here.
don't go against the Gun Control Act.
All right, guys, we've run out of time for Ed on that question, so let's switch.
No, he had
The arm's getting tired over here, guys.
Yeah, I've been at. So,
The other person needs to answer the question as well.
Oh no, they can both jump in.
I'll just make mine real quick, okay? My position is that the Second Amendment was not a backdoor pat on the back to hunters. The Second Amendment was done to do two things. First, it was to allow people to defend themselves, their family, their body, and their property. Secondly, it was designed to be the ultimate backstop to an overreaching government intent on eliminating or degrading our natural rights.
So do the civilians need a fully automatic weaponry to be able to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Byers, so if you were just shaking your head just now with John saying that they should be able to protect themselves from an overreaching government, just like you were agreeing with that statement with Waco and Ruby Ridge just a couple of weeks before the incidents of Waco, which was completely mishandled, but that's a completely different conversation. But let me ask you this. If a military-grade weapon is fully automatic and the purpose of the Second Amendment is to keep the civilians safe from an overreaching government. How are we supposed to keep ourselves safe from an overreaching government without government military grade issued weapons?
As I said, you need to contract your U.S. representative and your U.S. senator and have the Gun Control Act of 1968 amended.
That's not my question, though. My question isn't how can we change that. My question, though, is why do you see fit that should not be allowed? Why do you think that should not be allowed?
Because they're weapons of mass destruction.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What happens when the government comes knocking on your door wanting to take your family's guns, trying to keep your family under their shield and trying to disrupt your life? What are you going to do then?
I have no automatic weapons at my house or no prohibited weapons at my house.
Okay. All right.
So as long as you comply, it's not a problem.
I have none. I have no need for them. I've been in numerous critical
no
incidents
need yet.
involving gunfights. I've never had to use an automatic weapon.
We depend on our police to keep us from being in that problem. You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, the police are part of the government, so how can we keep them from overreaching as well? If they're a part of the government, how can we suppose that they're not going to overreach?
Yeah, exactly. The police are the active physical arm of the government.
Where do you guys draw weapons, automatic, semi-automatic, single gun? Where do you guys draw the line on what is considered fair arms? If I had an F-16 bombs, machine guns on it, it's a weapon, it's a gun. Draw the line there, or grenade. What do you consider a weapon? A grenade is not a firearm, of course, you know that, a landmine. How do you guys interpret that right fair arm? What defines that arm to be?
I think, make sure is, where is that line in the sand where once you cross that line, that's no longer, quote, an arm, that becomes an army? Is that?
Not so much just an army, just as an individual, they just an arms.
Okay.
What would you consider the definition of arms?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the question the way I think you're asking it. I don't see any limit to what you, as a free, sovereign American citizen, should be able to own. If you can afford an F-16 and you can put gas in it and you have a place to park it, by God, let's go for a ride.
Yeah. I would interpret it under the existing regulations by the state of Indiana and the United States government. Your civilians are not allowed to own military craft that still have weapons attachments or weapons on them. That's the federal law.
What about other types of, as I said, it just says arms. It doesn't specifically define a side piece or a revolver, a pistol, or a fire.
You mentioned hand grenades.
Pardon me?
You mentioned hand grenades, didn't you?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. How would you
Yeah, that's
qualify?
considered a weapon of mass destruction, and I believe there's a state and federal law against it.
Where do you draw the line with what's considered as a weapon of mass destruction?
It's defined in law. You
What
can
is
look
the
it up.
definition?
It's
What
fine.
is your definition?
My definition?
I think they want to know yours.
I would go to the book and look. You know, it's not up to me to put my personal opinion as I enforce the law.
I don't think that's what they're asking. I think that what they're asking is, where do you draw the line?
And
Where
I'm
do you,
saying, my reply
Let's be
is
respectful.
that I'm going to look under the law and see what it is. I'm not going to make a personal judgment call. I'm going to look under the law and see what they tell me it is.
Okay, you
So
do.
this is kind of the Jen Psaki circle back here. This is why I think it's important that we're having this discussion, because Mr. Byers is talking about following the law. And the example that I would use with federal law enforcement, which law did they follow, was Katrina, the hurricane in New Orleans. We had federal agents going from house to house with no authority to confiscate firearms. And we can talk about specific examples of that happening. And this is why I think we need a sheriff that is strong on constitutional law and understands that regardless of what a federal agent comes into our county and tells the sheriff to do, he's going to stand his ground and say, no. We may have had a major hurricane, there may be major destruction,
Boston
but you
bombing.
do not have the right as the federal government to go from house to house and confiscate firearms.
Is that illegal?
And
They did that?
It was illegal, but they did it.
It's against the law.
It is against the law.
Okay,
And
so
I
if
agree
someone was
with you.
protecting the law, that would not have happened, right?
I'm sorry?
If someone had been protecting the law, then that couldn't have
Absolutely.
happened.
That's why we want to make sure that our sheriff knows the law, understands the law, and is committed to following it regardless of who's telling him what to do.
And I agree. I agree with that. I've seen federal agents abuse too much in my own time as a federal agent. Trust them. I will never work with the Secret Service or the FBI because of that reason. People's individual rights should be respected, and it should be respected under the color of law. Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
you guys well said.
So you're saying you're going to protect our right to bear arms?
Yes, ma'am. Legal arms, yes, ma'am.
Even though the feds come in and tell you they're going
I
to...
won't be an employee of the feds. I'll be the county sheriff. And under the Indiana Constitution, it plainly says that you as a citizen of Indiana can bear a firearm for your own self-defense. It goes beyond that of the Constitution, U.S. Constitution.
No matter automatic, semi-automatic, whatever.
Like I said, if it's an automatic rifle or an automatic machine pistol, then I will go to the Gun Control Act to see what it currently says.
Okay,
you're
so
saying if it's legal,
Yeah.
you'll support it.
If you're carrying, say you're carrying a Glock 26 9mm compact, much like the one I'm carrying right now. If you were to carry that, and a federal agent came to me and said, you need to take that from her because she's got a concealed weapon, my response would be, get out of the county or I'll arrest you. You're acting beyond the color of your law and beyond Indiana state law. Get out.
And I know you keep going back to a certain definition, but I heard you mention assault rifles. So apparently you're not saying you're using that for a semi-automatic. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
So you don't think people should have? And so what's your definition of an assault rifle? Because people throw things around and they have no definition.
One round discharged with one trigger.
That is the definition between the two. A semi-automatic
I've
is
a
not
lot of things.
a
An
fully
assault
automatic.
rifle is actually a type of design. Came from the Armalite 15, which means
Right.
AR-15. My personal preference is I prefer the battle rifles. I prefer the M14s and the Mini-14s. I think they're easier to use in a combat situation because your field of view is much more wide open. You can hold the weapon down at low ready, and you can scan, and then when you have target identification, you bring it up there. Hard to do that with your guns. That's
So
just
you
my
would not
personal-
consider an assault rifle a weapon of mass destruction?
I'm sorry, one more time?
You would not consider the assault rifle the
If
weapon
it's
of
a
mass
semi-automatic rifle, I would not. No,
destruction? You
ma'am.
would not, okay.
That or a shotgun.
I was just checking.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
If you ever carried an M14 and all the ammunition you need in 100-degree weather,
Yeah.
day and night,
Yes, sir.
you might change your mind. I carried an M16, and I loved that little guy.
I was the prototype for the National Park Service when we went to a rifle. We eventually went to Mini-14s, but I carried an M14 at Sorrel National Monument, 60 miles north of Mexico in the desert. I'm very, very familiar with the weight and the heat with it, but I like the rifle. I mean, I just liked it better. And we went with the Mini-14s because they were a little bit lighter. And I like them. I like the battle rifle configuration more than I do the AR. That's just personal preference.
Yeah.
That's it. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Wait. Did you?
Nah,
Okay.
you guys are.
We'd like to give them both a chance to talk.
I had a quick question. If the law was changed, would you support civilians owning weapons like an F-16 with guns and bombs?
If the law changed?
Yeah.
I mean, if the law changed, who am I to put my personal opinions above the law?
Yeah, cool.
I might look for one myself. I wouldn't know where to put it. Too many
So-
Harleys in the garage. Yes, sir.
So if the law changed to
I'm
where
sorry. Wait a second. Go ahead.
That's you the question.
And I'm the one that's supposed to be making sure.
I think they're just throwing out questions for whoever to answer, honestly.
You have a
I think it's
response?
whoever.
No.
So if the law changed to where semi-automatics are illegal, would you think about, is it really a weapon of mass destruction, or because they label it, you would support the banning of it?
If Let me repeat that to make sure I understand what you're asking. You're saying if a semi-automatic weapon is made illegal, would I support that law? Is that what you're saying?
Would you change your definition of a weapon of mass destruction?
Yeah, basically.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't change my personal definition at all.
And if the law changed, you would support like confiscation of like semi-automatic weapons or something like that?
I would not.
Even if the law changed?
Yeah, I would not.
What would
I
you
don't
do?
see Indiana changing that law, and if the federal government wants to come down to it, they're on their own.
So why would that be unconstitutional when the banning of automatic rifles is?
You're asking me to comment on a what if in the future, and that's hard to do. I don't think that the state of Indiana would ban them, and I seriously don't think that the United States government would either. For every 100 people in the United States, there's 120 guns. It's just too many out there. It's like
Amen.
67,
Let's
63
go.
million assault rifles out there right now. Just way too many to try to confiscate.
Let's change that question a little bit, and let's use the same question, but let's use different scenarios and different items. So, because I think this is something that we probably have coming down the pipe. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Supreme Court essentially say that the right to an abortion does not exist within the Constitution. And we understand that in the state of Indiana on July 25th, we're going to have a special session with our General Assembly. And chances are very high that they will make abortion illegal in the state of Indiana. And part of the language of that law could very possibly be that the sheriff is charged with the responsibility of preventing federal agents from coming in and trying to impose federal regulations on an Indiana law. And so this is something that could happen within this month, within 30 days. And I think if it's fair to ask Mr. Byers, so Indiana passes that anti-abortion law and charges you with the responsibility of preventing federal agents from coming in and preventing that law from taking effect. At that point, are you going to be loyal to the state law, or are you going to allow the federal agents to come in and impose?
Mr. Colburn's asking me a very nebulous what if in the future. I can say this, that if
It's not a what if.
State law is in conflict with the federal law, there's a doctrine called supreme sovereign, and you can Google that. And supreme sovereign says that the federal law takes precedence. It does not state, however, that a county sheriff or a local police department has to assist any federal agency in the performance of the federal agency's job. Quite frankly, we have enough stuff going on with the jail and with the lack of response in the county right now, the sheriff's department, that those are my main priorities. I'm not too worried about the rest of it.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna kind of like put it in reverse a little bit. So he was just talking about would you support if the law had changed on semi-automatic rifles or what you consider assault rifles or handguns like the Glock 29 you had just mentioned, 9mm compact. What if that law changed? You said you would not support the federal agents coming in to confiscate it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what changed between the fully automatic and the semi-automatic?
Danger to the public.
There's not much difference though, because I mean you can look at, there are bump stocks which can allow you to shoot quicker, and people can pull the trigger quicker.
You can tell that to Uvalde, you can tell that to Buffalo, you can tell that to people that were assaulted.
It's not the gun that's the problem, it's the person behind the gun.
It's very true. Guns are only tools. That's the only thing they are.
And I think that's...
Uvalde was the bad police department. I mean, they did not do their job.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I said Uvalde was because the police department did not do their job.
That's right.
I mean, that's what it was.
Well, we had an individual that had some mental health issues that was allowed to purchase the weapons.
Because it was never reported. Because the police officers, again, didn't do their job.
Right, precisely.
Okay, so
So how effective are the gun laws that are on the books? I mean, if the guns aren't the problem, it's the person, how effective are background checks and making sure that the guns don't fall into the hands of the wrong people.
You want to take that?
My opinion would be that they can be very effective if they're utilized. Let's keep running with the Uvalde situation. Not only I'm not an expert on Uvalde. I haven't seen any of the documentation. All I'm going by are news reports, right? So my understanding is that the police have been called on this kid once or twice. Those reports weren't correctly made. But more importantly, we had a father that allowed his underage son to buy those guns with his permission. So, I mean, we have a number of breakdowns in this situation. And I don't believe that it was lack of gun control. I don't believe it was lack of gun laws. It was a lack of people doing the right thing. And for us to have a government that steps up and says, well, we need to infringe more on the Second Amendment because of Uvalde, I think it's just short-sighted and ill thought out.
And I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that, ma'am. The current gun laws as they are now are very ineffective. A person can be turned down to purchase a weapon at Rural King, and he can go to the 4-H ground to a gun show or go to a roadside guide during the fall where they're having roadside sales and pick up a weapon. You can
Buy
go
online legally.
Yeah, you can go to a friend and get one. As it is, the laws themselves are not real effective. I've never thought that. What I do think, however, is that as an instance, as a U.S. Customs Special Agent, I was assigned to ATF to help them with the backlog of NICS, National Institute of Background Checks, they're called NICS, in North Carolina. And we went to a place that was on the east coast of North Carolina. It was an old black guy that had a felony for drunkenness when he was probably 18 years old, and he was now like 80. And he had a revolver in pieces, and he would pawn that revolver each time and get money, and he'd go back and pay him and get the money back, kind of like a long-term loan. We got called in because somebody ran the serial number on the revolver and ran the guy, and the guy came back a felon. And the way we handled that was we just we told the individual, said, here's $50, and if, keep the gun, sell it to him, and and be done with it. That's how we handled that, to keep him from getting in trouble. But the laws aren't real effective. As Colburn said, it's a family issue. Sometimes you got to have the guns to go up to your kids and say, no, you can't have a gun. Or your spouse says you can't have a gun. Or you need to call. Hey, this has been a domestic violence situation. That person has a weapon. He or she has a weapon. It needs to be taken away from them.
So should parents be held accountable for the actions of their kids?
I'm sorry, ma'am, a little louder.
Should parents be held accountable for the actions of their kids?
Yeah, until they're 18, and then the individual should be held accountable. What's your view?
Depends on the kid. Yes. Obviously I have a 16-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and I take full responsibility for their actions and how they're growing up to be productive adults, and the good and the bad. But there is no way that today I'm going to go out and buy my son and I don't know anything about guns, an AR-15 or an M4 or M1. I'm not going to buy him that firearm because I don't think he's ready for it. Now, when he is 18, 21, whatever that age is, when he gets there, if he has the wherewithal, then he can buy that.
Change it up here. Right to privacy. Where would you guys draw the line of right to privacy? My home, I live in a rental property, my camper, or my automobile. Where does that right to privacy start with?
Anywhere you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, that right to privacy exists. And not being a lawyer, what I would say is that if you're in a rental home, an Airbnb, or you should have, even in a restroom in a public building, you should have that right to privacy. And there should be some restrictions on what the internet people can see and collect from you. We've got 30, 40 people here. I doubt if any of us have ever read every word in the terms and conditions of the phone when we turn it on. It's a brand new phone. When we accept those terms and conditions, we sign away some of our rights to privacy. And I don't think that's, in vernacular terms, I don't think that's right. We should still have that reasonable expectation of privacy, even on the internet and with our cell phones.
Is it our own choice to be on the internet, though? Like, is that infringing our amendment rights?
I understand that perspective, but wasn't it also your right to use a landline? And, I think there were a number of court decisions that said that the federal government would have to get a search warrant to be able to tap that phone and listen to what you were saying. And I think that same test should apply to cellular telephones and the internet.
Well said, sir. Ed, would you like to answer that too?
Let me add to that, and let's start out. Reasonable doubt, probable cause part of it would say at a traffic stop, your right to privacy, or even someone coming onto my property at my home, and then all of a sudden they suspect me. It's quite a qualified reasonable doubt or probable cause. I think they should stop at that point, go back and wait for the judge to sign that search warrant, or they should just be able to say, we think something's going on in their car, house, or whatever.
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but in my opinion,
a traffic stop.
Right.
My automobile. Is that private? Why I'm in that automobile, even though I'm on a public street? Police officer asks you where you're going, where you're being. You gotta get in your car, get in the run, whatever.
again, I'm not a law enforcement officer, but my opinion is that is an extension of your personal residence, and they do not have the right, just as, and legally they may. Legally, according to a court, they may have this right. I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I have no idea. But in my opinion, I don't think that they should have the right to say, okay, where are you going? Why are you out so late? Can you get out so I can search your automobile for drugs? To me, your automobile is an extension of your private residence.
Does the law support that answer?
I do not know.
Ed?
Every place that you mentioned has a reasonable expectation of privacy. If you worked over here at Bruce's Flooring and you had a locker in there with a lock on it, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that locker. Let's say you are the subject of a traffic stop. You did say you swerved or whatever. The police has reasonable suspicion to stop you. Let's say that as he walks up, he looks into the car and sees something that shouldn't be there, or something that triggers something. That's called Plainview Doctrine. That the officer is at the spot where he or she is supposed to be doing her or his job, and they have a right, if they see something, to question you on it. Do they have a right to ask where you've been and where you're going? No, they don't. And you don't have to answer them either. You don't have to answer them.
What amendment is that, guys?
The fifth, and there's actually about 9 amendments that cover due process. The Fifth Amendment is that against the right of not testifying against yourself. Of course, that can be circumvented with a court order.
Can I jump this question in? I've been trying for a minute. I'm sorry, I want to switch gears just a hair. You can go back. And this is again to both of you. The 14th Amendment. How does that apply to policing specifically?
In what context?
Due process. How does it apply to policing, or does it apply to policing?
You want me?
Yeah, because I'm not a law enforcement
We have
officer.
26 amendments to the Constitution. 9 of them, or roughly a third of them, deal with due process. Due process is a method by which your rights are protected from the government, and that includes cops, so that you can't be just automatically arrested and put in jail without due process or probable cause. So those are very important rights to have. Some of the other amendments that deal with it are the right to a speedy trial, the right to hear the accusation, the right to have a competent defense and witnesses in your behalf, the right to know what the evidence is that the prosecuting authority is using against you. All those are part of your constitutional rights in due process, and there's 9 of those in the 27 amendments to the Constitution. Yes, sir.
Don't red flag laws violate that?
I don't think so. I think that there's an overwhelming there's an overwhelming need for society to protect themselves from people that shouldn't have weapons.
Yeah,
We've had numerous instances here in Charlestown and Clark County where women have been killed because of husbands and domestic partners that didn't pay any attention to that, and they weren't properly done. I point to the Jeffersonville cannibal that killed his girlfriend and then ate her, even though he'd been arrested and released, and he came back. And there's just things out there that go beyond what the scope of a normal cop can do. But I think red flag laws are not meant to deprive a person permanently of their firearms. It's just until the heated situation is over.
Or the government that could theoretically be tyrannical decides to give them their right back?
I'm sorry, one more time, I can't hear you.
Or until the government that in theory could be tyrannical at that moment decides to give them?
I'm not aware of any that's happened. The red flag laws that have been used that I'm aware of have been usually domestic violence incidents where they take the guns for 3 or 4 days.
So what? Sorry.
We'll let him answer.
Well, as far as red flag laws go, I'm completely against them. I think they circumvent your due process because they essentially are on one person's accusation. You don't have the opportunity to confront your accuser. You don't have the opportunity to consult with a lawyer, and they confiscate your personal property on the accusation of one person that you don't even get the opportunity to meet face to face. They circumvent everything that he just said he supported.
They don't seize your weapons. They take them temporarily, and you get them back within 3 days.
They temporarily seized them.
How do they get them back? Does the judge give
take
them
and
back?
seize.
No,
You have to go
some
in
states
front
have
of the judge?
laws that specifically say after 3 days you must return this. Other ones have provisions by which the arresting officers or the seizing officers can go in and actually petition the
Thought they
court to
weren't
keep the
seizing.
weapons away from them. Different states have different things. In Indiana, I believe they come back after 3 days.
What protects the person that have the weapons that have been called, that someone has put a red flag on? What protects that person from somebody just being,
What protects them from guilty
Yeah,
until
vindictive.
proven innocent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Exactly.
a 3 day.
Amen.
That's a 3 day
So
extension.
for 3 days, they have no right.
Well, no, it's not they have no rights. They can get a lawyer and petition back. However, most states, including Indiana, allow them to go back within 3 days anyway.
So you're absolutely fine with somebody losing or suspending their rights for 3 days if
For
somebody
those
says
particular
something.
weapons, yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, so
Due process.
let me ask you this then, Mr. Ed. So let's say Billy Bob down the street has a problem with Johnny Boy down the street.
Yes, son, I can't hear you.
Sorry. Let's say Johnny Boy down here has a problem with Billy Bob. Johnny Boy decides, you know what? This guy's going hunting next week. I want to make his life absolute hell because, he didn't pay me back for drinks last weekend. And he decides to say, hey, this guy's been up to some shady business. I've seen some cars laid there at night. I've heard him abuse his wife. What stops the government from, temporarily seizing their weapons? What stops that?
First off, it has to be a domestic partner, and he's not a domestic partner. If they go to the house and talk to the domestic partner, and he or she says, "No, everything's good," then it ends there.
Okay, then let's say it's the girlfriend who found out that her boyfriend cheated on her or something.
They'll go to the house and see if there is indeed any evidence that there was any type of domestic violence. If there's not, then they won't do anything.
Okay.
You've got to have probable cause to do legal actions.
Would they have the right, based on that, to go in the house to be questioned?
Not to search, no. They knock on the door. They can ask to be let in, but you don't have to let them in.
And if they were told to leave?
Huh?
If they were told to leave?
They should leave. They should leave.
Yes, sir. Oh, do you want to answer?
Oh,
You got 3 whole minutes.
Okay, well, it's hard to fill up 3 minutes with. I do not support any red flag laws at all. I do not support. No. Again, I believe that red flag laws are circumventing your due process, and they they're, in my opinion, unconstitutional and should not be used. And as American citizens with natural rights to self-protection and rights to our property, red flag laws circumvent those rights. And it's not correct.
Are there laws already?
And I
implemented?
disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
I say that there are due process safeguards within the red flag laws.
That was my question. I was going to ask if you thought that there were already procedures in place that can circumvent.
No, they're not adequate. How about that?
They're inadequate?
So, my question is this: if an individual's out on the street,
Can you speak up, sir, a little bit?
if an individual's out on the street or in a public area, and somebody in a house or business calls the cops and says somebody's out here on the street and they're doing things that I think are suspicious, and law enforcement shows up and they walk up and they ask who they are, and they refuse to say who they are and ask, what's this about? The officer says, well, right now I'm under investigation. I need to see your driver's license. I need you to ID. What's your stand? Is that legal?
I would say the individual has no right to be compelled to produce his license if he's not doing anything. A smart officer would pull up and observe for a while and see if there's anything going on, and if there wasn't, he wouldn't make contact. If there's something going on, then he would make contact, and we would have every right to ask for it. In the context of which you gave me, no, he doesn't have any right to ask him. It'd be like me coming up and asking him for his license as a federal agent. I have no reason to do so.
Yeah. And so if the individual,
I would agree. Again, we have a right to be secure in our persons and a reasonable expectation to privacy, and I would not see how anyone could be forced or compelled to acquiesce to that request.
yeah, just over that.
Yes, ma'am?
I don't have a question.
We're down to 8 minutes.
All right. So this is a question coming in from the internet. Someone
Let's
wanted.
handle these first. Make sure that we've got all the questions on here before we
Okay, so this is my question then. Mr. Byers, do you support the recent Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade? Do you support that constitutionally?
It's not a matter of whether I support it or not. It's the law. Personally, are you asking me personally?
Yes.
Or professionally?
I'm asking
I don't support
personally.
it. Professionally, I do.
Okay.
That's how it works. There's a lot of laws that you're called on as a law enforcement officer to enforce that you may not agree with. That's not your job. Your job's not to put your personal views and opinions into the administration of social control via law enforcement. That's not your job.
Is that hard?
Huh?
That's got to be hard.
That's why there's so many bad cops.
I just want
Or people not standing behind their
to
convictions.
clarify something because I'm a little bit confused.
Okay.
On one of your posts that I was reading, you said you were pro-life?
Mm-hmm. Personally, I'm pro-life.
Okay. All right. Well, then I misunderstood your answer just now. Okay.
Does the
Yes, ma'am.
question need to be rephrased?
Well, I'm sure I just made a mistake.
Yes, ma'am.
Earlier, you made a comment, maybe I misheard, and everybody can say you didn't do it right. But you made a comment that the federal law supersedes state law.
Mm-hmm.
But on Roe v. Wade, it's thrown back to the state.
Mm-hmm.
So then then you have to follow the state law as opposed to the federal law.
Until federal law becomes promulgated, if it does that at all. Yeah.
It becomes what?
Promulgated, it becomes law. If federal law becomes promulgated that guarantees abortion, then that's we're back to square one with the supreme sovereign. But right now it's not, and I don't know how that's going to happen. I have no way to know.
And see, I again, this is the difference between a republic versus democracy, because I believe that position is completely inaccurate given the 10th Amendment, where if a right is not specifically delineated in the U.S. Constitution, that right is given to the states or to the people. And in this case, the Supreme Court has said that right is not in the Constitution, therefore it is given to the states to make the decision. So regardless of any federal law that could or could not be passed, the Supreme Court has already said that the Constitution gives the right to legalize or not legalize abortion to the states. So regardless of any federal law that is passed, the Supreme Court's already said it doesn't matter because it belongs to the states.
And I would disagree with that in that it says that the laws that are not reserved by the federal government revert to the states. So the federal government takes them back and forth each time. In this case, it's reverted back to the states. And it may stay that way for all I know. I don't know. Ma'am, you have a question?
I did. You said, made a comment about that. The comment was that's the reason we have so many bad cops. So, in your opinion, majority of cops are bad?
No, ma'am, I don't say they're bad. They're not corrupt per se. It's just they have a hard time separating their professional selves from their personal selves. And that comes in all sorts of things like PTSD. It comes in how they enforce specific laws, how they handle people, implicit bias they don't even know they have on something, mental health issues.
So annual training for police officers and for sheriff's department and for the jail employees should be mandatory if it's not already. I know when I worked at a state prison, it was mandatory that we had certain training every single year to like pound it into our heads that we're not there to punish those people. We're there to maintain security.
Yes, ma'am.
Current
In the air marshals, we
not
did.
maintaining training, by the way.
In the air marshals, we did 16 hours a month training. So we did that too. Yes, ma'am.
This has nothing to do with the Constitution, but this is a question that's been needed. There are people that have served their time in the jail, and they are not let out in a timely fashion.
I've heard that a lot lately.
So their rights are being violated.
Yes, ma'am, they sure are.
So what are you going to do?
Well, I don't know about, I don't have any firsthand knowledge of those examples. They may exist.
For instance, Kamala Harris. She kept those people in jail so they could clean up her highway in California.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. I mean, they've served their time, they had their 90 days, and now they're on day 120, and they're still out there cleaning up the highway because Kamala won't let them out of jail.
Well, that's a clear violation of their natural rights.
I know. And so who's going to fix it?
It comes under cruel and unusual punishment. One of the things I'd like to do as a sheriff is have a specific date for the criminal justice system, i.e. that the judges, when they do their J&C or judgment and committal order, come in, it has a specific date of their release. If not, then if there's any identifying data in that judgment and committal order, then we'll do it ourselves, and then within like 15 days we'll send a letter to the judge saying this individual is due to be released.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. First, I was just trying to get clarification. On the Roe v. Wade, you said you didn't agree with it, but you would support it, right? That's
yeah.
Even though you
professionally, professionally, I would support the law. Personally, I disagree with it.
Okay. Going back to the ARs, well, your term assault rifle, you said that if a law came down to where you needed to confiscate them, that you wouldn't. So do you follow the law, or do you
follow the law?
Follow your gut? I mean, because with the Roe v. Wade, you said even though you didn't agree with it, you were going to support it. But with the guns, you said you wouldn't support it, even though it's a law. No, that's great because I was just confused.
I will support and enforce every Indiana state law there is. There is no Indiana state law against assault.
Okay, so if there
I'm
was,
not
you would
Fed,
support
I'll be
that
a
then.
state. I'll be a county employee.
Okay.
You're an employee.
Okay.
In that case,
I have one more question. A representative, we were talking, and of course he's up north, and with the January 6th stuff, okay, there was somebody from his district was there, didn't do anything, but the federal government actually showed up at their house to question them, to arrest them, to do whatever. The sheriff stepped in and said, you have no jurisdiction here. How would you handle a situation like that?
Well, I think that sheriff was wrong. They do have jurisdiction as the supreme sovereign. I wouldn't get involved with it, but I would, if that happened here and I knew the individual. Now you said he was there and he got arrested, or they were questioning him and arresting him. Did they do both, or did you get arrested?
They were just going there. They were harassing him. Actually, is what they ended up doing. I don't know that they arrested him.
Okay, let's
they
say
were harassing him though.
Let's say for the sake of argument that they were harassing and then arresting, and I'll answer both.
Okay.
If they were harassing him, he had every right to tell them to leave. And if they didn't leave, then he could call a local officer, either a local PD or a sheriff, to come out and talk to him. And they could tell him, hey, you've been trespassed, get out of here. Just because you have a federal badge doesn't mean that you're immune to state law. Let's say they arrested him. If they had probable cause to arrest him, then I would suggest to that individual that they use their due process and get an attorney.
Okay, so
You want a chance to answer?
I would agree. I mean, there were allegedly federal laws broken. So, it's up to the federal law enforcement to find out who broke those laws. And once he's arrested, he is supposed to have due process. Now, I think we've all heard stories about due process not being provided to these individuals because of political.
They're more political prisoners now versus anything else.
But I don't think that the sheriff has the authority to preemptively keep federal law enforcement from doing their job.
So you're saying that the state police or the county police don't have the authority to be able to stand in the way if constitutional rights are being currently violated by another enforcement agency?
To me, it didn't sound like in this situation the constitutional rights were being violated. If the federal law enforcement had reasonable cause to believe that this person broke a federal law, they have the right to pursue that person and arrest him.
If they did that, they would have to have a warrant.
Well,
Or probable cause. I agree with him, and when you added the stuff about an unconstitutional act, then I feel like it is the state and local officers' duty to step in and say, this is unconstitutional, you can't do this.
So as a sheriff, you wouldn't have a problem sending one of your officers in the middle of something like that, an FBI?
I'd probably go
just
myself.
at least
I'd probably
check
go
out the
myself.
investigation?
I would go myself. I don't like the FBI, I don't like suits.
Well, what would you
forward
do?
to talking to him, huh?
Mr. Byers, what would you do when you got there? In that
If it was
situation?
clearly an unconstitutional act, I'd tell them it's unconstitutional, you need to leave. You're subject to arrest here.
Because they just got records of phone records. That's why they showed up. They were just in DC at the time.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Well, then they should say, why were you there, and get an answer and leave.
People need to learn their own constitutional rights too, which is great that we're all here.
And that's the thing about
interested in this.
constitutional rights. They're worthless unless you stand up for them.
Right.
If you don't stand up for them, they're just written on a piece of paper. Albeit a very old piece of paper, it's still just a piece of paper.
And that goes for
stand up for them.
And not to step on you, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But I think that goes for the entire Constitution. And anytime there's an assault on that Constitution, regardless of the letter that the person has after their name, we should stand up and defend the Constitution. And that, because it's that document that's providing us the opportunity to be here tonight.
Yep.
I think you've seen that Mr. Byers and I, we have some disagreements, but we have some agreements as well. But, nobody's up here getting violent. Nobody's up here arguing. And this is what that piece of paper guarantees us the right to do.
Last question.
Can you speak to the sheriff's role when it comes to eminent domain, taking private property for public use?
We went through that here in Charlestown, very much so. There's about 3 people here that would gladly tell you about the use of eminent domain as they tried to take their property during the last administration. Eminent domain, and it's not a policing issue, but I will answer my personal opinion on it. I think it should be used very sparingly, very rarely, and then only in times of extreme need. I believe in the free market. I think that if you want someone's property, you should pay them appropriately.
Can I ask one question and follow up and kind of bring it all together? Colburn says everything is subject to state constitution. Colburn says that the constitution is basically non-world.
mob rule. I think it's a messy rule at best when it's democracy, but I also know that there's other forms of a republic that aren't so messy, that are pretty tyrannical. Of monarchy, a monarchy with a parliament, that can be pretty tyrannical. I've seen that in some of the countries I've traveled to. I think that, and I agree that it's a republic, but we're a democratic republic, and I think that's the best thing for it.
And again, on a matter of semantics, I would disagree. There's never been a true democracy in the history of the world that did not degrade into tyranny at some point, because it is mob rule, it is majority rule, and the majority has the ability to trample the individual rights and the natural rights of the individual.
Jefferson said it would happen every 3 generations, regardless of if it was a democracy or a republic. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think in the United States we've seen it about every 4th generation. Okay, and and I think there's a book out called The Fourth Turning, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think one of the things that we have been able to avoid, that Thomas Jefferson talked about, is watering that tree of liberty with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
I know, right?
I'm getting old. I can't hear very well, but I do believe that we've been lucky in that regard. Although there probably has been some blood, I think we can look at the Civil War as a two-sided coin. It ended one of the greatest travesties in human history, slavery, but at the same time, it was a baptism with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Would you also agree that the protesters have been shedding blood for that same idealism?
Which protesters?
Depends on whatever you want to think of. Anyone who's been protesting that has been injured during protest, would you not agree that they are also fighting with bloodshed for their rights?
I'd say that's on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
I think there probably have been situations where people were protesting correctly and within the law and shed blood, and that's a tragedy. But I think also, let's look at Michael Byrd and when he shot the unarmed Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt in the Capitol. That she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was there, and she was unarmed, and an armed law enforcement officer shot her with absolutely no repercussions.
Absolutely.
We ran out of time. You guys mind if I ask one big question? It's just one, and it's you all can answer however you want. These clocks haven't been working anyway because you all been short answering and other people been questioning. But let's talk about the First Amendment just a little bit. Let's talk about our freedom to our speech. Okay? Do either of you or both of you or separately, however you want to answer it, believe that it is the law enforcement's job to stop a protest?
If they're breaking the law, absolutely.
I was just going to say, I wouldn't even do it unless there was somebody getting hurt. If somebody's getting hurt, I would stop it or try to at least intervene to get the person out of there. But
burn buildings.
I think that
There's a difference between a protest and a riot.
Protest has a long history here in the U.S., and I agree with
They're breaking the law, but it's
like I
right.
said, if they were getting
Protest.
hurt, then I would try to stop it or at least get the person out of there.
Yeah, peaceful.
There's
protest.
peaceful
But when people start
protest,
getting
and then
hurt,
there's
it's not.
people who throw the word protesting as an excuse to act out violently
Very well said.
and
Very
demonstrate
well said.
criminal behavior.
Right.
There's
So
a
the
big difference.
Is my question still, like a follow-up was going to be based on that. How do you differentiate? Is it by saying if this person is committing a crime during their protest, then would you act on that person, whereas the person right next to him maybe rode together there? If this person is not violating a crime, would you leave them the hell alone? And what do you think?
If it's possible, I'm afraid that in a situation like that, where you have a large crowd, again, I'm not a law enforcement officer. I've never been in that situation.
Well, it is a police debate, though.
But to me, if I'm standing next to a guy that just threw a brick through a window, and I didn't touch that brick, it's going to be hard for a policeman standing across the street to know which one of us threw it And if there's 10 of us around, it's going to be even harder. So he's going to have to look at all 10 of us. And we're going to have to explain
laws to be able to enact.
I would say that, number one, if you threw a brick and just did property damage, if it was a protest, I wouldn't get involved. If you threw a brick and hit somebody, then I'd get involved.
Okay, so if someone,
property.
hold on, if I,
You're not going to protect personal property.
In a protest?
Business property, business owners.
You know, in a protest, I will protect personal property from theft and that sort of stuff in a protest situation. If I could see the person that threw the brick and knew who it was, I'd go get them.
okay, so you wouldn't conduct an I'm sorry, excuse me, interview or even like any sort of trying to figure out who did what if someone vandalized one of these cars in a protest.
If I saw him throw it, I wouldn't need to conduct an interview. Wouldn't need to give him Miranda rights.
Okay, that's not what I'm asking though. That's not.
If I saw it.
So if you saw it,
But if I didn't see who did it, and there
if you
was a
had
group of 10,
exigent
which was
circumstances in which you could enact, then you would. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
If there was a group of 10 people and somebody threw a brick and I couldn't tell who it was, I'm not going to do anything. So
You're not going to
Well,
disperse
and-
them.
I'm
You're
sorry?
not going to disperse them. Even though you know this crowd
Yeah.
is causing that chaos,
Yeah.
you're not going to disperse
No, I
them.
would try to disperse them, try to get them out of there, or at least break them up.
Because they don't have a right to do that in protesting. You do not have a right.
Yeah,
to
that's
destroy
against the
things
law.
in
You don't,
protesting.
but
So
it
that would
has to
actually
be,
be-
it has to be a
They don't have the right to
misdemeanor
tell us to
committed
leave.
in the
That'd be
presence
like
of the officer, and the officer has to see it. If the officer
So
doesn't
at
see
that,
it.
at that
Unless
point in
it's a
time,
red
it's no
flag.
longer a peaceful
Yeah.
protest. It's no longer what you're protected against. Once you start vandalizing things, and once you start hurting people, then that has now crossed the line.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
I've got a way to clarify this. Is it an individual basis, like an individual that's violating law versus a person that's at the protest? Is it an individual, person-by-person basis, the law enactment? Is it by individual? Or is it collectively as a group?
I don't understand your question, please.
Well, again, I think this goes to the heart of our initial discussion. Are we looking at the individual, or are we looking at a collective mob? Are we looking at a mob of people who are being empowered to destroy personal and public property? And it doesn't matter if it's one person that does it or if it's 10. You should be held accountable for the destruction of that property. If there are 10 people here and one person destroys property, and I know it was one of these 10 people, law enforcement needs to question and interview every one of those 10 people.
My question was, you going to get rid of all 10 people, or are you going to just find the one that was guilty?
I'm going to detain all 10 until I find the one that did it.
So guys, look, if I commit disorderly right now, none of y'all get to be here. You know what I mean? But that's the way you're saying it. If I committed the disorderly right now, if I violated an Indiana crime, what you all are saying when you say get rid of the whole group, that's a 9th Amendment violation, by the way. That is saying all of you all have to leave based on Chris's actions.
But
Is
you,
that fair?
but you won't have to leave because you all have due process.
Well, that's what protects it, right?
Right.
Which is the question.
And I would
was
have no
asking.
problem doing, it was that guy.
But then you fall back to his question, which was if he doesn't like somebody and just lies to the cops and says, this guy.
And that's true, but you're probably gonna have everyone around here, if
So
they
what's
are
my
not part of the
protection?
mob group.
What's my protection that separates you from being punished for my crime?
There is no punishment.
No, that doesn't. That doesn't work. It's called hearsay. If I don't admit it,
Right, we're at an investigation stage.
We've gone over our
Violation,
limit.
but I'll
We
tell you
need
what the
to,
answer is. Due process,
call it.
the law.
If you have any
It has
questions
to.
I'm sure John will stick around. If you have any questions for me, I'm going to stick around. Thank you, Chris. I
That was
appreciate
great,
it.
guys.
Thank you, guys.
Questions from the crowd?
Okay.